So as I said before, this is I'm going to present some preliminary results and initial observations on the work we are doing on Kikuyu at the moment, because yeah, this is only recent work. We are finishing collecting data this week, so this is all initial results. So it would be good at some stage to get together again and have a look at the final results when we have everything analyzed, and particularly the quality of the Kikuyu. And it would be really interesting to see how those different treatments I'm going to show you really affect the quality of kike, and particularly the utilized pasture, the Kikuyu pastures. So the work we are doing in grazing management in terms of research is basically based on these logics here, that there is a strong relationship between grazing management and profit of dairy systems. I will see if I can get the pointer here. So basically, all farmers they need to be making decisions on nearly on a daily basis on three key decisions. Basically, one is the stage of maturity of the pasture pre-grazing, then how much they actually utilize in terms of grazing intensity, or what is on offer, and then what they do in terms of how they deal with the residues after grazing. So all these three decisions have an impact on diet quality, pasture intake, and utilization, and those are the three key factors driving margin in these systems and from their profit. For example, pasture intake, obviously as we increase pasture intake, we potentially minimize the use of expensive supplements. So we are reducing feed cost, and from there increasing margin. And as we know, utilization is also important, because we have a cost per hectare of growing these pastures. So the higher the level of utilization per season, the lower the feed cost in terms of dollars per kilogram of dry matter utilized, and from there better margins. So these are the logics behind the work we do. So we are doing research on all three aspects in all the species we work in relation to diet quality, pasture intake, and utilization. So I'm going to show you some results in relation to kike and other species in relation to pasture intake and utilization. So starting with the pasture intake, all the work we've done so far in beef and dairy systems are clearly showing, and we are consistently finding the same sort of results. Animals can achieve high levels of pasture intake only when grazing the top leafy stratum of the pastures. And consistently, every time we force them to graze into the stemmy material here, we've seen always a decline in pasture intake. And that is the case for a number of different species in beef systems. We work with Kikuyu and sugarcane back in Argentina, and also the dairy systems in relation to lucerne or Kikuyu. So I will show you some results in relation to the pasture intake. As we know, there is nothing new about knowing that as we increase grazing pressure and force the animals to graze down the pasture, there is a drop in intake. There are lots of previous studies that are showing that relationship between grazing intensity and pasture intake. For example, the work done by the group of Minson in the 80s, showing a clear decline in pasture intake as we force cows to graze down that lab. More recently, the work we've done with Kikuyu, lucerne, published last year, when we force the cows to graze down into the lucerne, there was a decline in pasture intake and milk yield. So this is a very well-established relationship between grazing intensity and pasture intake. And also it is well known the mechanism behind that decline in pasture intake is that drop in intake is mainly driven by a decline in bite mass, and from there, horizontal depletion of the top leafy stratum. So here we have a diagram from the paper from Grigorini showing that the animals can take big bites. Here the bite is represented as a cylinder, the depth of the bite and the area of the bite there. So the animals can take big bites when they are grazing the leafy material. So really wide bites and deep bites. So large bite in terms of volume and mass. And then when we force them to graze into the stemmy material, they will use bite size even more and more as we force them to graze down. So that is essentially the mechanism behind why pasture intake declines. And so there is all these grazing strata one on top of the other, and each of those stratum have a depth, but also they have an area. So, and that is quite important to keep in mind, is sort of the horizontal depletion of each of those stratum is quite important. So the animals start taking bites from the top leafy stratum, and they take more and more bites, and they deplete that stratum horizontally until all that material is gone, and then they graze the residue, and they deplete that stratum, the second stratum, and then the third stratum. So that's the mechanism, the grazing patterns. So it's quite well understood. What we have done with the work we've done is that we clearly studied the relationship between the horizontal depletion of that leafy stratum and intake. So that is the results I want to show you now. So we've done a number of experiments that are showing that strong relationship between this grazing pattern and pasture intake. And we did capture that grazing pattern, so sort of collecting data, but also images. So for dairy system in Kikuyu, we don't have data in relation to grazing pattern, or we have images, so I will show you that in a minute. And we established that relationship with the pasture intake through a demonstration trial that we just finished this season. For lucerne in dairy systems, we did capture that grazing pattern with data and photos and establish that relationship to intake, and that is the paper we published last year. And then we have all the work here in relation to the systems. I don't want to go there today, but we can talk about that if you want. So now I want to show you the images from Kikuyu that are showing that grazing pattern and the impact on pasture intake. So this is Kikuyu pasture, and as we can see there, the animals can take big bites from that leafy stratum, and as you can see, they are utilizing that leafy stratum horizontally. Once that is gone, they come back and regraze the stem material, and there is where intake declines because they can only take small bites from that stratum. So there is a horizontal depletion of that stratum again. So as you can see here, comparison between large bites taken from the leafy material versus small bites from the stemmy material. As a consequence of that, pasture intake is, for example, for the demonstration trial that we finished this season, this week, we measure levels of pasture intake of about 7 kilos per heifer per day. But when we force the heifers to graze into the stemmy material, intake declined to 4 kilos. So that is what we found for Kikuyu, clear relationship there between grazing the leafy material, achieving high levels of pasture intake, and the declining intake when we force them to graze stem stratum. The other thing we observed is that obviously the depth of that stem material is variable, as we all know. So you can see here for Kikuyu different heights. That amount of stem varies. The higher the pasture, the higher that stem material is. So you see data here. So increasing pasture height for Kikuyu means increasing stem height. You see the blue points there, increasing stem height there. And the cows naturally will select the leafy material. And that's what you see here. The grazing height essentially will follow they take the leaves, grazing at essentially the tip of the stems here. As you can see, these lines is essentially the grazing height. So that's the selective behavior all the animals show with a strong preference for the leaves. So what it means in terms of management is that every time we force the cows to graze into the stem material, we should expect a decline in intake. And that is important to see, because that means that targeting fixed residue heights may compromise pasture intake. As you can see here in this example, for example, for Kikuyu, if our target residue 5 centimeters, let's say, in this situation, when we get the cows to graze a leafy material, the residue height will be 5 centimeters, and we wouldn't be compromising intake in that situation. But if we had it for any reason taller Kikuyu, that means that if our target 5 centimeters is clearly below the height of the stem, we are forcing the cows to graze this stem material to reach the 5 centimeters, and then is where we are compromising intake. So that's important to keep in mind. So is fixed residue heights may compromise pasture intake. So by allowing the cows to only graze a leafy material, we make sure we maximize intake. But if we are trying to maximize intake, we shouldn't be forcing the animals to graze into the stem material, and we should just leave the residues, the stem residue alone, I guess. I mean, not forcing the cows to graze the stem residue, but dealing with the residues later with another group of animals, or removing the residues mechanically, essentially. So, and we have shown that that is clearly the case, that the residue height where intake declines depends on the pasture height, and we did demonstrate that with the first experiment we did with axolotls using steers, and I don't want to go there today, but if there are questions in relation to that, I can talk about that later. So that is pretty much what we found with this demonstration trial this season, that you've seen the photos, and the strong relationship between the depletion of that top leafy stratum and pasture intake. So now I'm going to show you the results and the images from the lucerne trial that we did. And again, the strong relationship we found for lucerne in relation to the utilization of the leafy stratum and the connection with intake. So this is a grazing down experiment we did at Gatton. And as I said, that's the paper there. You can have a look. But initially, I would like to show you the images of that grazing down process, which is exactly the same as I showed you for Kikuyu before. The animals take big bites from the top leafy material, and they graze at stratum horizontally. So once they have depleted that stratum, that, by the way, that the depth of that stratum was about 15 centimeters. Once that is gone, they come back and take really small bites from the next stratum, and that is only 7 centimeters. And then again, it's before centrifugal grazing, they come back and graze the next stratum, and that is only 5 centimeters. So here you see a comparison: large bites from the leafy stratum, the small bites from the stemmy stratum. As a result of that, pasture intake was around 10 kilos in this situation, and with 4 centrifugal stem material was only 6 kilos. And that was in a PMR system where the animals were receiving between 11 and 14 kilos of PMR. So those are were the images from the experiment. This is the data. So essentially showing the relationship between the depletion of the grazing strata and pasture intake. As I said before, here you see the depth of those strata there, the 15 centimeters for the top one versus 7 or 5 for the bottom grazing strata. So in terms of mass, that is equivalent to about 1,000 kilos of dry matter consumed from that leafy stratum, and only 300 kilos from this lower stratum. So clearly showing that they can achieve high levels of pasture intake only when grazing that leafy stratum, and intake declines when they are forced to graze below that stratum. And here you see the data from the horizontal utilization or horizontal depletion of each of those strata. So they horizontally deplete that one, and then they come and horizontally deplete this one and that one, and so on. And that is the data for the horizontal depletion. So initially, nothing was utilized, and as they graze down the pasture, what happens is that they deplete that first stratum, and then at some point there will be 100% depletion of that stratum, and then they come back and graze the second one, and then the third one, and the fourth one. So what we see in terms of pasture intake is that intake is high when the animals have access to that top leafy stratum, but as soon as we force them to graze the lower stratum, there is a clear decline in pasture intake. So this is clearly showing that data, that the strong relationship between pasture intake and the depletion of the different stratum. So the same thing we found for the other species in beef systems. I can show you data later if you want. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is that this is how animals graze. Essentially, it doesn't matter if it is beef animals or dairy animals, and it doesn't matter what species it is. Essentially, the same grazing behavior is seen in all of these grazing systems. So in terms of then the conclusion from that work is clearly pasture intake decline, as I said, when the cows finish grazing that top leafy stratum and they are into the transition of grazing the lower strata. Okay, that the transition is a key point where there is the breaking point of pasture intake. So we need to pay attention to that, and based on that understanding, then we can develop very simple grazing management strategies that can maximize pasture intake. And one thing that helps us in terms of detecting that transition between strata is looking at the fecal patches, because as you can see in this image here, initially the cows, what they do is graze around the fecal patches. You can see a fecal patch there. they graze all the uncontaminated leafy material around the fecal patches, but then when they are getting close to the fecal patches, they sort of refuse grazing the leafy material there, and instead they graze the stemmy material that is not contaminated. So that is the simple way to see that transition happening from grazing the uncontaminated leafy material into grazing the stems. That is the point of the breaking point for intake. So just looking at the fecal patches or the ungrazed around the fecal patches, we can tell if we are maximizing intake or not. So if we come after grazing and what we see is only ungrazed around the fecal patches, we know that we have high chances of maximizing intake. But if we come and see that everything has been grazed, including around the fecal patches, it's quite likely that we are compromising intake in that situation. So because then that proportion of ungrazed around the fecal patches is so important for the management of the grazing systems, is that we call this sort of path grazing to refer to this sort of management, short for proportion of ungrazed pasture. So that's a very simple way to visualize and manage these systems for maximizing intake. So based on this understanding, essentially, we sort of put together a simple grazing management target to achieve high levels of pasture intake in any of these grazing systems. Yeah, and essentially the target is 100% utilization of that top leafy stratum, excluding the fecal patches. So that is sort of the practical applicability of this understanding, essentially. So as I said, we can visually manage the grazing. We have here three situations: one undergrazed, ideal, and overgrazed for ryegrass, for example. And you can see the differences between them. In this situation, obviously, there is a lot of uncontaminated leafy material that has been grazed. So that's clearly undergrazed. Ideal is when what is ungrazed is only around the fecal patches here. And overgrazed is when everything has been grazed, including around the fecal patches. So we can visually manage these systems. But also we can, to achieve that target of utilizing the leafy material, we can also calculate pasture allocation based on the top leafy stratum on offer. So instead of allocating based on a proportion of the total on offer, we can do more accurate allocations and allocate the pasture based on the top leafy stratum on offer. So you have an example here of a calculation of the allocation. If we have a target pasture intake of 10 kilos per cow per day, and we have 100 cows, then our target pasture intake for that group of animals will be 1,000 kilos. And it's, let's say we have a total a top leafy stratum offer with 1,000 kilos, and we have a contamination of fecal patches of, let's say, 15% of the area. That means the utilizable top leafy stratum would be 850 kilos per hectare. So we need 1,000 kilos to cover the requirements from those cows, and we have 850 kilos on offer of the leafy material utilizable. That means that our allocation should be about 1.2 hectares for that group of animals. So that means that we, by calculating the allocation this way, what we do need is to have an estimate of the top leafy stratum on offer. So, and we have done some work on the calibration of different pasture meters through a project with subtropical calibration of pasture meters on farm. where we basically calibrated these pasture meters to estimate the top leafy stratum on offer and also the bottom stem stratum on offer. You can see here some of those calibration equations, for example, for the rising plane meter, for Kikuyu. So increasing height in the rising plane meter, increasing leaf on offer, and also increasing stem on offer there. So if you are interested in these calibration equations, you can click that link there. That will take you to this very info web page where you can see the reports for ryegrass and Kikuyu, where you can see the calibration equations for the different pasture meters, but also how to use and the protocols for each of those pasture meters. So that can help us to achieve more accurate allocations, pasture allocations to maximize the pasture intake. So that is essentially covering pasture intake. So as I said, we found higher intakes when grazing a leafy material and lower intake when you force a graze stemmy material. That is essentially the conclusion from quite a bit of work done there. Now moving to the utilization, pasture utilization aspect of this work. We have done some experiments using plots for Kikuyu over the last 2 seasons there, and I will show you some results in relation to that. And as I said before, we did this demonstration trial, grazing trial with heifers as well. So the results are clearly showing that obviously as we force the animals to graze down the pasture, the utilization per grazing increases as you force the animals to graze down into the pasture. The problem with this is that as you force them to graze into the stem material, there is a decline in pasture growth. And I will show you the results in relation to that. And because of the lower pasture growth, we see lower levels of utilization per season, growth and utilization per season as we graze the stem material. And we are seeing higher levels of pasture growth and utilization when we graze only the leafy material. So essentially, grazing the leafy material allow us to have not only higher pasture intake, but also higher growth rate and utilization, as I will show you in a minute. So in relation to that experiment we have done over the last 2 seasons, using plots at Gatton, that is the basic structural treatments we looked at. We looked at 2 factors, leaf stage and cutting height. In relation to leaf stage, we studied the 4.5 leaf stage, which is currently recommended, but also we evaluated 3.5 leaf stage, considering that we would minimize stem elongation by going early, so sort of utilizing Kikuyu. And all the cutting heights that we looked at were 5, 10, 15, and 20 centimeter cutting height for both leaf stages. And that wasn't a fixed cutting height, it's a threshold. And I will show you in a minute now what I mean by threshold. So this is an example of cutting height of 10 centimeter threshold. So what that means is there is a 10 centimeter threshold. Let's say that is 10 centimeters. And what we did is initially, early in the season, we have the first, second, and third cut, let's say. And what we've done is for every cut, what we do is to remove the leafy material, simulating grazing here. So we took the leafy material in each of those cuts. But for this stemmy material there, because in the first cut, the height of the stem was not higher than the 10 centimeter threshold, we even cut the stems. The second cut, that residue height of the stems didn't reach the threshold, so we even cut the stems. We started cutting the stems only when the stem height was higher than the threshold. So essentially we cut the strata, the leafy, and then the stem material. And that is essentially simulating residue reduction using another group of animals, so mechanically. So, and from then on, every time we went and cut the plots, what we did is cut at the same high 10 centimeter threshold for the rest of the season. So that is an example for the 10 centimeter threshold. We did the same for 5, 15, and 20 centimeters. So this is, I think, is quite important because that makes this particular experiment quite relevant for grazing systems because of grazing situations, because we are actually simulating that grazing over time. And I think that is one of the reasons why we found quite interesting results and are quite different from previous studies. So that is essentially what I meant by threshold heights. So this is the growth rate for the first season from those plots, where you have the growth rates here for the different treatments. So we have the 3-year stage and the 4-year stage treatments. And within each leaf stage, we have the 5, 10, 15, and 20 for 3 years, and 5, 10, 15, and 20 for the 4 years. And we have here the growth rates for the top leafy stratum, blue bars here. And then on top of that, we have the growth rate for the stem material, the bottom stem stratum, in orange bars here. So essentially what we found is as we increase cutting height, we found that there is an increase in leaf growth, as you can see here for the 3-year stage. And there is this increase in leaf growth is actually asymptotically, it's not linear. So there is a high increase in leaf growth when we go from 5 centimeters to 10 centimeters. And then there is a sort of a marginal increase when we go to 15 or 20 centimeters. So the biggest difference is between 5 and 10. And there is not a lot of difference between 10, 15, and 20. And the same thing we found for the 4-year stage, sort of an asymptotic increase with the biggest increase between 5 and 10 centimeters there. And it's interesting to see that there's no difference between 3 and 4-year stage for leaf growth. For example, 5 centimeter cut is about 30 to 35 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day. So there is no difference between 3 and 4 leaf stage in terms of leaf growth. We did see a great higher total growth rate for the 4-year stage, as you can compare here. The leaf plus stem is over 60 here in comparison to this 5 centimeter 3-year stage is only 50 as a total. But that increase in obviously that higher growth rate for the 4-year stage is coming from the stems. So all we are achieving by waiting for 4-year stage is growing stems instead of leaves. So it's clearly a lot less stem growth for the leaf stage 3-leaf stage in comparison to the 4-leaf stage. So if we are looking at grazing, targeting leaf growth, it would be obviously the obvious choice would be 3-leaf stage, because we are achieving high levels of leaf growth without growing a lot of stems and accumulating a lot of residue with the stem. The higher we cut it, the more leaf growth we achieve, but we don't really want the really high cutting heights of, let's say, 20 centimeters, because one of the problems with that is that when we have those really high cuts, what happens is that the structure of the pasture becomes weak, and we see a lot of lodging of the Kikuyu. So in a grazing situation, we would be reducing the utilization of that Kikuyu through a lot of trampling potentially. So it's not a wise option to go for 20 centimeters. It's more like the 10 or the 15 centimeter option would be the way to go from my point of view. And probably the 10 centimeter is obviously better than 5, and it's not that different from 10 from 15. So I would say that probably the best option on all these treatments is 3-leaf stage, cutting at 10 centimeters. So having an understanding on why we see these differences in leaf growth is quite important. And there are essentially 2 mechanisms that are driving leaf growth there, increasing leaf growth as we increase cutting height. And the first mechanism is tiller size. You can see the differences in tiller sizes there between cutting heights. What we are doing by cutting the Kikuyu really low, let's say 5 centimeters, we are essentially forcing the tillers to stay small, as you can see there. And as we increase cutting height, we allow the tillers to grow bigger. And because they are bigger, they have longer leaves. And with longer leaves, there is more leaf mass. And that is where a big part of that increase in growth rate is coming from. As we increase cutting height, bigger tillers, higher mass, higher growth rates of the leaves. So that is mechanism 1. The second mechanism is related to the cutting of the apical growing points. So here we can see an example of cutting heights relative to the position of the apical growing points here, different cutting heights for that particular tiller there. We know that the position of the apical growing point is about 3 to 4 centimeters below the tip of the stems. As you can see here, this is a tiller that it has been cut, so you can see the apical point there. So this the new leaf is growing from that apical growing point. And below that, we have the lateral dormant growing points. And we have quite a few of them as we go down the stem. So the position of that apical growing point is about 3 to 4 centimeters below the tip of the stem. So that is important because this apical point is active, and there is a lot of growth coming from there in comparison to this dormant. Because they are dormant, they take time to wake up, and that is a slow process. So cutting the apical point, it makes a big difference in terms of growth, and that is what you see here in these images, where when you cut the tiller above the apical point, the growth comes from that apical growing point, and you get a lot of apical growth, high growth in that situation. As we cut below that apical point, what we are doing is essentially decapitating the tillers. And if we cut just below the apical point, what happens is that that tiller can no longer grow from the apical point, but is growing from the lateral dormant growing point. And the growth here is a lot lower than that, the apical growth. The tillers will slowly recover and produce more area tillers later on, but that is a slow process, and that explains the massive drop in growth when we decapitate the tillers, when we cut below that apical point. And the lower we cut that tiller, the greater chances of seeing a lot of tiller death. And you can see that photo there. There's a lot of tiller death happening there. And there is the growth is coming from the base of the plant, or the tillers, from the ground. We have basal growth, but that is a slow process again. So that results in immediate decline in growth rates as we cut down. The lower we cut the stems, the lower growth we have. And that's what you see here, the big contrast there between these two plots. This plot is most of the tillers were not decapitated, and you can see a lot of growth happening there. And this situation, most of the tillers were decapitated, and from there you can see that there is a very low growth happening there. So that is the second mechanism. This is nothing new. You guys probably all know that this is really what happens in Kikuyu and other species, that by cutting the growing points we reduce growth. But what we've done with this experiment is really quantify that impact. So, and that is, those are the results I'm going to show you now. Really, how much we are compromising growth by cutting those growing points. So these the treatments from the 3D stage, and we have growth rate for the top leafy stratum, and also the relationship between the growth of the top leafy stratum in relation to the cutting of the stems or the decapitation of those stems. So we have the data from the last season here, from early November all the way to early March. And this is a 5 centimeter cutting height. So you can see there, the growth rate was really high initially in the season, and there was a clear decline in growth rate as the season progressed. Very low growth rate at the end of the season. And that was clearly associated with the cutting of the stems. As soon as we started cutting the stems here, we could see clearly a decline in growth rates. Essentially, what is happening here is by cutting the stems, we are removing the apical points, and there is a clear decline in growth. And that is for a season of 150 days. That would be an utilization per season of about 7,000 kilos over the season. So if we look at the 10 centimeter cuts, what happened there is the growth rate was high initially and was maintained for a little while there. And then there was a clear drop in growth again. And that was again associated with the cutting of the stem, the bottom stemming material, and the decapitation of the tillers. As soon as we started cutting the stems, once the stem height reached that 10 centimeter threshold, there is a clear decline in growth. Again, a strong association between cutting the stems and growth rate of the leaves. And now, if we look at 10 centimeter, 15 centimeter threshold, there was a greater delay in cutting the stems here. So the stems cut happened really early this year. So before we cut stems, it was high growth, and as soon as we start cutting the stems, there is a massive decline in growth. And that is equivalent to about 10,000 kilos dry matter, so a big difference in comparison to the 10 or 5 centimeter threshold. So these are the treatments where, as I said before, the threshold was 5, 10, or 15 centimeters, and once that threshold was reached, we maintained that cutting height of 5, 10, or 15 for each of those treatments. We had an additional treatment I haven't told you yet, but that additional treatment was cutting again when the stems reach that 15 centimeter threshold. But instead of maintaining the cutting height at 15 centimeters, what we did is to drop the cutting height to 5 centimeters. And what happened here is, again, growth was high initially until the stems reached that 15 centimeter threshold. And as soon as we cut that stemmy material, we saw a massive decline in growth rate again for that treatment. And that was low for the rest of the season, the same for the other treatments. So, and that is about 9,000 kilos of growth for the 150-day season. So that is essentially what we found, a strong relationship between the decapitation of the tillers and the decline in growth rate of the leafy material. So I have some ideas about how we can try and see if we can maintain that growth over the season, and we can go through that later if there is an interest on that, but that is what we are thinking of doing in terms of research in the future, trying to maintain that growth and see if we can achieve that through grazing management or cutting regimes. So that is pretty much the initial results I had to show you in relation to utilization. By grazing only the leafy material, we not only achieve high intake, but also high utilization and growth, faster growth. So Peter asked me to see if we can put these together somehow and come up with how we can apply this in practice, all this knowledge. We can only reach preliminary conclusions with the data we have so far, but we can come up with sort of preliminary grazing targets to achieve high level of party intake utilization based on this knowledge. And it is based around these really practical decisions all the farmers have to make in relation to the pre-grazing leaf stage, defoliation intensity, and what to do with the residues. So we can come up with 3 clear targets there in relation to those decisions. We can say that probably grazing at 3.5 leaf stage will give us maximum leaf growth with minimum stem growth, maximizing the growth and utilization of the leafy material. In terms of grazing intensity, if we target at grazing 100% of that top leafy stratum, excluding the fecal patches, what we are doing is achieving high levels of pasture intake and not grazing into the stemmy material that compromises growth and utilization. And also, once we need to deal with that residue and the residue becomes a problem, then we reduce the residue to 10 centimeters when necessary, but not with the milking herd. Sort of what I'm saying here is the targets for the milking herd will be A and B. So graze at 3.5 leaf stage, take only the leaves, and then come back and graze the pasture when it's at the right leaf stage again, and so on. But when we have the residue accumulation is a problem, then we will use that with a separate group of animals. So that is basically my presentation. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I hope this is enough to trigger some discussion, and will let you know your opinion about these results and how you see that in terms of how that fits into what you know and what you recommend in terms of grazing management for Kikuyu. And yeah, looking forward to the discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks, Marcelo. So, everyone hear me? You can hear me, Marcelo?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I've got a quick question, and I'll see if others can just put their questions on the chat. I'll get to you, and you can ask your questions. But firstly, if you can go back to those slides where you had the growth over the season at 3 leaf, and where it declined into February, where normally we would see that's the highest growth rate. And I'm just trying to, yeah, you've got that drop off in growth there that, as I say, normally February, late February, March is one of our highest growth rate periods. Just, I'm assuming that these plots were irrigated, the nitrogen rates were good. And probably the other question is what happened to the 4-leaf stage plots in that situation? Did they drop off as much for the 4.5?
Yeah, very interesting questions there, Peter. I think is what we are seeing here is essentially the principles of pasture growth, and that decline in pasture growth or the peaking in growth really depends on the timing of the removal of that, of those apical points. So, and that is exactly what you see here. If we decapitate the tillers at this stage, there is a decline in growth there, but if the decapitation happens here, there is a decline there. So there could be a situation where the decapitation of the tillers happen later in the season, so you can still see a peak there later in the season as well. And this is the data from the last season, but the data from the first season, because we sort of started the experiment a bit later, we saw that peak happen in February, as you're saying. So it is actually the timing of the decapitation what drives the maximum growth and the decline in that growth after that. Is that making sense?
Yeah, no, better understanding.
Exactly right. So yeah, the difference between 3 and 4 leaf stage is essentially driven by the same principle. What happens is that I don't have the data here, but for the, let's say, 15 centimeter threshold, for the 3 leaf stage, the decapitation of the tillers happened sort of late December. But for the 4 leaf stage, because the tillers are bigger at the 4 leaf stage, they reach that threshold early in the season. So if we compare let's say the 15 threshold for 4 and 3 leaf stage, the decline for the 4 leaf stage happened earlier in the season in comparison with the 3, because the threshold is reached later in the season for the 3 leaf stage in comparison with the 4 leaf stage. That makes sense. Yeah. And that is one of the reasons why we don't see a lot of difference in growth rate for the full season between 3 and 4 leaf stage in terms of leaf growth.
And you haven't got the quality data back on those leaf stages yet, have you?
No, exactly not. We finished collecting the samples this week, so really looking forward to sending those samples for analysis, and We have examples for both seasons and all the treatments, so it will be extremely interesting to see the quality for the different treatments. Yes.
All right. Well, I'll open up to other people's questions. Is anyone, Todd, have you got something to? Anyone? All silent. You can take your mute things off. Anyone else want to ask a question?
Can you hear me, Marcelo? This is Pete Hutton here.
Yes, I can hear you.
That's really good. I've been watching the progress of this story over the last few years, as you know, and I'm really interested to see the real juicy part, which is that purple dotted line there. What your ideas are there to push that out a bit further into the season and stop that growth rate drop through cutting that apical part of the plant.
This one here,
the
wish line here, that would be nice to see if we can achieve that. But
yeah, you must have some good ideas there.
It's right. So we know that what really controls the growth is the capitation of the tillers. So it is all about controlling the capitation of the tillers. So the potential way to maintain that growth over time is control the capitation and size of the tillers through cutting height and frequency of cutting. So what I'm saying here is by control decapitation is this is an example of control decapitation because we have in any patches we have the tillers are of a range of sizes for any particular patch in any moment. If we look at the size of the tillers, we have a range of sizes there from small tillers all the way to taller tillers. So by control decapitation, what I mean is that the grazing or the cutting height has to be relative to the position of the apical growing points. So in this situation, if we cut in at this height, what we are doing here is we are decapitating only 1/3 of the tillers. You can see here the cutting height is below the tip of the stems only in this group of tillers. But then these tillers are not touched. These are not decapitated. So you will see a lot of apical growth coming from those tillers. So at any particular time, if you keep practicing these, what we are doing is we are delaying the growth of these tillers, but we have the growth from these other tillers. So potentially what we do is sort of having lower growth rates even initially in the season, but hopefully that will maintain the growth over time because there will be always a proportion of the tillers that are growing from the apical points. So that is just an idea at this stage. And if that is the case, then we would achieve much higher rates of utilization just by doing that, if that is the case.
And so doing that, you would avoid having those stems getting to 20 centimetres. Is that right?
True, exactly right. It's to me, the cutting height, it should be sort of maintained. If we initially early in the season is establishing a cutting height that doesn't allow the stems to go too big, but not too small either. So I would say potentially a 10 centimeter cut, it would make more sense than a 5 or 15 or 20. Yeah. I think the tillering dynamics in the 10 centimeters is going to be a lot healthier than the 5 or the 15 or 20. Also, the frequency is absolutely critical because if you wait too long, then all the tillers are going to have the stem height is going to be above the cutting height, and you will be decapitating all the tillers. So the frequency of grazing is absolutely critical, and that's why we should probably start thinking about more about stem height rather than leaf stage. That is something that it would be important, because what we know is driving growth is the decapitation of the tillers a lot more than leaf stage. So the frequency of the cutting is really important, and the height as well. So we sort of have controlled decapitation. What happened in all these situations is that at some point, we decapitated all the tillers all together pretty much, and that's why we saw that massive decline in growth after that. Is that making sense or not?
Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah.
It's hard. Sometimes you don't have a lot of control. I know that I've had trials where you plan to get out on a certain day and you're delayed a couple of days, and all of a sudden you've got, it grows so very quickly. And if you have a rotation on a farm to be able to alter that, because it can go from that, your middle size to the next size within 3 or 4 days. So, whether you can really get a lot of control is.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think it is important, is to understand the principles of pasture growth and try to do the best we can in terms of maximizing growth within the situation we are facing, essentially. Come up with potentially alternatives to try to maintain that growth the best we can. In a situation where you have a lot of growth, particularly in the middle of the summer after a rain event, maybe the rotation then has to be a lot shorter and potentially utilize the rest of the pasture, maybe using silage or hay or whatever it is. So we sort of try to maintain the pasture and minimize the decapitation of the tillers over time. But yes, these are our thoughts, and we need to do a lot more thinking around that and how we can apply this understanding to real situations.
What was your nitrogen rate too?
Yes. We made sure we didn't have limitations in terms of growth from water or nitrogen. So the nitrogen application was pretty high, and because we were essentially running this experiment within an existing paddock, we didn't have a lot of control on how much nitrogen was put in there. We got the nitrogen that was as part of the management of that paddock in particular. So the application rate was pretty high. It was about 150 kilos of urea after every grazing or every second grazing. So sometimes that was about 2 weeks apart. And this is also under no limiting water either.
When you're taking it off in in dry matter and not returning that dry matter, it does take a lot more than grazing does. Anyway, anyone else got some questions? Neil, if you've got some more comments, questions, Todd? Very quiet.
Probably any concerns about applying this in practice, or it would be good to hear your opinion about these sort of results, and if that means anything to your recommendations for grazing management and things like that. Any concerns or comments? That would be good feedback, particularly.
Perhaps to alleviate some of the concerns of Peter there, I did some trials in WA down in Bunbury a couple of years ago now, and we were grazing, cutting with a mower down to 5 centimetres all year, and we went up to 3 units of it. We had a dose response to nitrogen on that from 1 up to 3 units of N per day. And even at that high level of nitrogen application, when we cut it down to 5 centimetres, we saw the same thing, that drop off in growth, because we're cutting off that apical stem.
Yeah, no, I can understand, Phil.
Do you have any other treatments with the high cuts?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. Okay.
But I wish I did.
Okay. Kirsten's got a question. Just want to ask it?
Yeah, no, it was just more of a comment, Pete. I was just saying, given locally here with our Kikuyu-based pastures, and in those periods where Kikuyu toxicity can be a problem, our advice is to graze at that four-leaf stage. So I was interested to see the quantity and the results for those 4 stages.
Yeah, it would be good to see what sort of qualities we get when we do the analysis. I can see your concern there. I don't know if you, Peter, have any comments in relation to that particular issue. If you think that could be a potential issue raising a 3-leaf stage in comparison to 4.
Yeah, look, we don't know really. We just know that, well, there is some concern. And I mean, the work Bill did years ago was that potassium levels are higher and magnesium, and there seemed to be a better balance of some of those micronutrients as you got later into the, Yeah, but I mean, I think the thing you find with a lot of this work is this: you get certain results under some conditions, and they might vary a little bit under different conditions. So just got to wait and see what your results say.
Yeah.
But I know that would be a concern going early high K levels, low magnesium, things like that. Yeah, no, it's certainly interesting, and that the impact of just simply knowing that if you do graze and take that top off, you're probably going to get a slower growth in the next grazing. Useful to know.
Yeah. That's fine.
Yeah.
Peter, Tanya here. I was just going to say, that's what we've seen anecdotally out of the field too. If they graze it too far down, then that residual isn't going to come back as fast. Whereas if you manage that grazing height, that's when you're going to get the benefit out of that stand at the end of the day. So everything that Marcelo is saying there is exactly right in the paddock as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, and obviously sometimes we can use that to advantage to slow things down. For ryegrass, for example, if we're going to, we could possibly use this as a recommendation to let that last grazing go a little bit higher and then graze it very hard and enforce a greater level of stress on the plant when we're trying to sow ryegrass. So
yeah, exactly. Just to manage it that way at the end of the season and to create that better establishment with the ryegrass coming through that kite. Yeah, and absolutely.
We do that with silage. We know that happens with silage.
Yeah.
So you've seen that it's much better established the ryegrass when you take it down really hard on the silage. Is that what you're saying? Or?
Yeah. We know that if we let it grow up for silage to the more like the taller stuff, which you'll get a longer period before the Kikuyu regrows and gives the ryegrass better chance to get established. So, but we can't take silage off all the time. But if for example, what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things we are doing now is we took we did the last sampling early this week, and what we did is to take all the material and plant ryegrass on top of these plots. So yeah, there are big differences there in the residue, or in terms of you see in the low cuts, you see a lot more green Kikuyu, and in the high cuts you see that has been taken off. So so we should see those differences then in terms of how quickly the Kikuyu comes back and how well the ryegrass is established on the different treatments and plots. So that's going to be interesting to see. That is, it happens based, according to what you have observed in relation to taking Kikuyu for silage, in comparison to sort of cutting it low before establishing the ryegrass. So that's going to be interesting to follow this winter. Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting too is, I think some of your work showed that the longer you leave it, you get less tillers, and I think that shows out with ryegrass. In rotational grazing, you get less tillers, but if you continuously graze, you get a lot more tillers. And we're focusing on one thing here, but if you've got more tillers and they're trained to be to come from a lower height, then maybe you're getting some compensatory effect there. And I'm just trying to think on the run there, but it's not very clear. But you would expect something that's great, kept low. And I think the other thing is how, keeping cows. How do you train, or have you had success in training the cows to graze at 10 centimetres versus 5? How's that working?
As I said before, is go back to that slide. So we are not training the cows to graze to 10 or 5 or 15 at all. We allow the cows to graze only the leafy material, as I showed you before. And we deal with the stem material by putting a second group of animals or mechanically sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that is really important. We allow the cows to sort of show their natural behavior in terms of grazing the leaves, and we are not forcing them to graze into the stem material at all. So this experiment was more about what we do with the residues after that, and how low we cut the residues, and how that affects growth after that, essentially. So we know that forcing the cows to graze into the stem material, as I showed you in those many experiments, the cows have really refused to graze into the stem material. And what they do, instead of properly grazing that stem material, what they do is to drop intake. So it's the grazing management we are proposing is to graze only the leafy material, with the dairy cows, and then deal with the residues with a second group of animals, or releasing that mechanically.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think from my experience, there's a bit to digest. So just another call for any questions.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, everyone seems to be dumbfounded, and I'm sorry there's not more discussion. But I know when I listened to you last week, a couple of weeks ago, I wanted to go away and think about it. So perhaps that's what they're doing. But we'll keep in touch, Marcelo. I really appreciate what you've done, and it's certainly given me. I mean, sometimes it just confirms things you suspect, and but it gives a greater understanding of what's going on, and it's certainly some very good material there for communicating to farmers what's actually happening. And I think from that point of view, it's could be quite good.
Okay.
So yeah, thanks very much. You've done a great job, and we'll record this and send it out to others. I know there's a couple of Neil. Moss had some questions earlier, but he's had to leave.
Right. Yeah.
So we'll send it around and just see what other feedback we get. But
yeah, absolutely. That would be. I would really like to know that feedback and take it on board and thinking about this, and particularly thinking about future work or research we can do around the concerns or things like that.
Yeah. No, it's certainly been interesting. All right. Well, we'll let you all get back to work, and thanks very much again.